Hey everybody, this is Dustin Purrier with Giant Rocket Ship. This is my Autotask office hours. Now, generally I focus on something specific to Autotask. And let me share my screen, but something came up recently. I've been seeing a lot more, let's see here. I've been seeing a lot more questions about um, co-managing sites in Autotask. And one thing that I just don't feel like has been addressed very well, and I'm clicking around trying to find my notes for this. One thing that I just haven't seen addressed really well when you're doing co-managed or you're working um, you're working with outside parties, and we see this in our customers, and I also saw this when working as an MSP, is just properly structuring how that engagement will go. And so what I wanted to do, I wanted to carve out this particular office hours talking about how to properly structure a co-managed IT environment. Now, what I think I'm going to do in the next one is go through Autotask specifically and show you some of the features in Autotask for co-managing. And in this one, I'm going to set you up for success to lead into that next webinar. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to tackle the 12 risk um, of co-managed IT contracts and what you should do. And again, next webinar, we're going to dig more into Autotask, how to make sure you properly implement everything in Autotask to support co-managed IT contracts. Now, the first thing that I've seen is that MSPs, particularly when they're doing their first co-managed engagement, is that they're doing a very poor job of delineating or defining where that separation of responsibilities is. And that almost always is going to come back to haunt the MSP and not the customer. Because the customer, if there's ambiguity, is going to just say, hey, look, this should be falling under the contract. It's not excluded. And you're really going to be put on the back of your feet to argue that point if you're vague. So what you want to make sure is you have some type of matrix defined. And I have an article about this, about responsibilities matrix that properly defines who owns what. The next thing is the poor escalation process, and this can kill a co-managed relationship. So what does escalation look like? If you're not careful, absolutely what will happen is the customer is going to escalate the ticket to you with almost no notes, no field work. You're not going to be clear on what the problem is, and you're going to burn hours and profitability trying to figure out what the ticket is even for. So you want to have a very clearly documented escalation process. What's really nice is if they're going to escalate a ticket to you, they should have to fill out a form, even if they copy and paste the content to the ticket, that has some specific questions that you want them to answer before escalating that ticket. The third thing, and this isn't as important depending on the size of the customer, is a toolset mismatch. What most commonly happens, particularly if they're not using your Autotask instance, is not having easy access to their tickets. You can fix that using the API integration. You can have your staff manually enter tickets, but that happens a lot. The other thing, and this happens more often, is you will find that the tool set for monitoring and managing computers is completely different for an MSP versus an IT department. An IT department is typically going to have software that's custom designed for single tenant operations. That's not true in an MSP. That can cause an issue. The next thing is inconsistent ticket documentation. Again, what I was doing when I had my MSP was I would have templates, either in Autotask, or if they use their own help desks, they would have to install them in their own software that they would have to fill out whenever they were going to give us a ticket or work with us on a ticket. That, again, even if they copy and pasted the data, just gave us a really quick start on solving those problems. So the next thing is the escalation bottleneck. So one thing you're going to hit, and this is where you need to be very clear, is when they escalate a ticket, where does it go in your own business? Right. So quite often, particularly if you're tier 2 or tier 3 support for an enterprise org, you you don't want their tickets going straight to your help desk. because that's just going to frustrate the customer. But at the same time, if you're doing tier one activities, you don't want those customers going to your tier two or tier three because you're losing profit. So you want to have a very clear path for that escalation. And typically, you're going to want to assign a point person. Maybe it's a technical account manager or your service manager that owns that escalation process. One thing that you will see and is becoming more important now are security gaps. So in the MSP world, particularly if you're a more mature MSP, you're going to have a really strong security stack, or at least you should, that handles privileged access management, password vaults, antivirus, DNS filtering. And it's not as common to see that in an IT organization or IT department. And your contract may make you liable for that. So you want a very clear requirements page in your contract indicating what the security tool set is, what policies and procedures they need, and to make sure you align those with your own and your insurance. Okay, let's talk about culture mismatch. This is kind of a minefield if you're not careful. Culture mismatches could include um, the working hours. Now, you may say, okay, well, I have my work hours in the contract, and that's great. But every co-managed client that you have is going to test those boundaries, right? There might be some sites where they really want you to work after hours, even if that was excluded. Um, and often it's not because they're trying to get one over on you. It's because that's how they operate. They know that business hours are 8 to 5, for example, but they're used to their IT people doing stuff after hours or on the weekends, and they're going to test to see if you'll also support that. And so be careful in making sure you learn how their culture works and where that is and is not compatible with you. Scope creep. This happens all the time. You outsource, or rather, they outsource their help desk tier one to you, and suddenly you start getting tickets for network support changes, for security credentialing, for things that are out of scope. The struggle you're going to have here is unless you, as the owner or the service manager, inspect every escalated tickets, if you're Tier one is not properly trained to stop those tickets from being processed by your organization, you will start processing those tickets. And once you've been doing it for a couple of months, you're really up a creek because the customer's going to say, but you've been doing this the whole contract. What's the change? And then it's going to be on you to define the new rules of engagement, justify them. So you don't want that. You want to have a very clear boundary on scope, and you want to stop scope creep as fast as possible when it starts happening. The next thing is insurance coverage. So this is a really great area. And we all know cybersecurity insurance for MSPs is getting tougher and more expensive. But even ignoring cybersecurity, you are liable if you break things in the customer environment. And that's not cybersecurity, that's just liability. And you want to have a clear understanding of where their insurance starts and ends and where yours starts and ends. And that needs to be defined in your co-managed contract. Okay, well, great. That is a quick overview. Again, I'm setting up the next webinar, which will be about implementing code managed in Autotask. Before we move there, I wanted to make sure we were clear on what a good, healthy relationship looks like for a code managed customer. So again, Dustin Perrier, Giant Rocket Ship. I look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thank you.